Hello, welcome back to the channel. Today we're talking about the Vitesse Evo. Okay, so cards on the table, I am a Vitus ambassador, so take everything I say with a pinch of salt. However, that being said, I did buy this bike with my own hard-earned cash, and Vitus haven't asked me to make this video. So these are my honest opinions and experiences of riding the bike over the past 12 months. The Vitesse Evo has been my main bike for the last 13 or 14 months. I've trained, raced, I've even bike packed on it. I've taken it across cobbled climbs, like Welsh mountains. I've ridden it in the sun, the rain, the snow, all the conditions. I've probably done about 10,000 kilometers on it in the past year. So I feel like I'm starting to get to know this bike inside and out. But I think it's a good idea to go back and discuss why I've decided to get the Vitesse Evo in the first place, because that's where a lot of you who are watching this video are going to be at right now. You've probably heard of the saying, strong, light, cheap, pick two. And up until I got my hands on the Vitesse Evo, that was almost certainly the case with every other bike I'd ever owned. Either they were lightweight and extremely spongy when out of the saddle sprinting, or stiff but too heavy for the hills. Then I came across the Vitesse Evo, which seemed to tick all three of the boxes with a race-ready bike that wouldn't break the bank. And here is what I had to say about the bike after my first ride. First ride on the Vitesse Evo today. Now, after only riding the bike for a couple of hours, it's really hard to give a verdict on what I actually think about it. However, I think it's one of the best bikes I've ever ridden. And if I compare it to my previous carbon bikes that I've ridden, which I really didn't get on with, because it just felt, every time I was out of the saddle doing any sprinting, it felt a little bit spongy and I felt like I was losing some power. I didn't feel that at all in any of the sprints that I did in the ride today. So about 3 years ago, Vitus embarked on a project to kind of redesign all of their top-end drop handlebar bikes, and the idea was to kind of throw away everything they knew already about those bikes and build them from the ground up. With the Vitesse, that was all about differentiating it from the ZX1, which is the aero bike, and making it as light as possible. So being an ambassador, I was lucky enough to speak directly to the people that designed the Vitesse Evo, and made a couple of notes on the conscious decisions they've made to make this bike as light as possible. So one of those decisions was to not go for full internal cable routing like you see on most modern bikes. The reason being is that with internal routing, you need to make the head tube bigger and need to fit bigger bearings, so you're adding little bits of weight in lots of places. But what I do like is that they've tried to make the bike look a little bit more modern by having the cables routing on the non-drive side of the frame. As I said in that first look, one of the things that sold me on the Vitesse Evo was that Vitus had worked with the likes of Ed Clancy and Scott Thwaites to make the bike stiffer than the previous iteration, and having spoken to the engineers that designed the bike, they said they did this by kind of focusing on the bottom bracket and the head tube, which is kind of the two main areas kind of flex under kind of the pressure of sprinting, especially out of the saddle. However, the engineers that designed the bike were keen to point out that they hadn't just made a bike that catered for pro riders, and that sometimes added stiffness can translate into an uncomfortable ride. So they wanted to kind of strike a balance between added stiffness and comfort and make a bike that would make the most amount of people smile when riding the bike and have a nice experience. And they achieved this through the carbon layup. So I've been told that they used around about 250 individual pieces of carbon, which have kind of been placed into the mould in a very specific way in order to kind of create the kind of characteristics of the bike. And I was told that even moving one piece by 10 to 20 degrees would give a completely different handling bike. Vitus have also designed this bike as a disc brake only, so they didn't need to design the bike with that kind of bridge for the rim brake version. So this means that the tyre clearances are absolutely massive. So they've stated you can run up to 700 by 30, but in reality I reckon you can kind of run a 32 or even a 34 in there, which makes it a great all-round bike, especially for a kind of British like club rider that kind of wants to ride the bike all the way through the year. What I like most about the Vitesse Evo and Vitus in general is that they don't use proprietary parts, and that's because they try to design bikes that are as user-friendly as possible. This means using a standard bottom bracket size, a standard seat post diameter. This makes the bike highly upgradable and easy to source parts when things go wrong. And this kind of thinking stems from Vitus's ethos of making bikes for real riders, which in my experience is not just a marketing spiel. Having spoken directly to the guys that designed these bikes, every decision they made was of the benefit of the everyday rider, not for the 1% of people who have a mechanic that can do everything for them. As I said at the beginning of this video, I've done over 10,000 kilometers in the past year, and I can honestly say this bike lives up to the hype. For me, the Vitesse Evo epitomizes balance. It's stiff, it's light, but without compromising on comfort. It's an absolute banger of a bike that's a joy to ride in a whole wide range of environments, from twisty crit tracks to Welsh mountains, across cobbles. Yeah, this bike can do it all.